New York in the early 1900s wasn't built on steel alone. It was built on food. Most Jewish immigrants came fleeing violent pogroms, discrimination, and crushing poverty in Eastern Europe, especially Russia, Poland, and Ukraine, searching for safety and a chance to start again. Step into the crowded streets of the Lower East Side, and you'd smell history cooking. Onions sizzling in chicken fat, bagels boiling in kettles, and pickles brining in wooden barrels. For these families, food became their language when English failed, a way to remember home and survive the new world. And those foods that were once shaped by poverty and fear would one day define New York cuisine itself. Because behind every slice of pastrami on rye and every warm braid of challah is the taste of survival, written by people who refused to go hungry ever again. 1. Bagels with lox and cream cheese. Before New York had skyscrapers, it had bagels. Round, dense, and hand-rolled by Jewish bakers who rose before dawn. They'd boil the dough in kettles, bake it in coal ovens, and sell them by the dozen from pushcarts along Hester and Rivington. For immigrants, a bagel wasn't breakfast, it was belonging. When the first waves of Eastern European Jews arrived, smoked salmon, lox, was a rare luxury. Sliced paper thin and laid carefully across a bagel smeared with cream cheese. It tasted like home, yet entirely new. Old world salt meeting new world abundance. By the 1920s, this humble pairing had become a weekend ritual in Jewish homes across the city. What started as survival food became a symbol of success. You could leave the shtetl behind, but one bite of bagel and lox brought it all rushing back. The river smoke, the Sabbath mornings, the family crowded around a table far from home. 2. Bialys. If the bagel was the immigrant's crown, the bialy was its humble cousin. Softer, flatter, and brushed with onions instead of shine. Named after the Polish town of Białystok, these rolls came from bakers who couldn't afford luxuries like eggs or glaze. They baked flavor right into the dough, caramelized onions, poppy seeds, a pinch of salt, and the scent of struggle. In the cramped bakeries of the Lower East Side, bialys were breakfast for workers heading to the garment factories. Hot from the oven, they were eaten plain or with a scrape of butter, often while walking to a shift that lasted 12 hours. Unlike bagels, they were never boiled, just baked, browned, and gone before the tray cooled. But behind that simple roll was memory, of ovens lost in Poland, of families scattered by war. Every onion-scented bite whispered, "We made it." In a city of strangers, the bialy was a quiet comfort. Warm, fleeting, and unmistakably home. 3. Kasha and kugel. Before pasta or rice filled American plates, Jewish immigrants turned to kasha. Humble buckwheat groats, toasted golden and mixed with onions, eggs, and schmaltz. It was earthy, nutty, and honest. The flavor of the shtetl brought to the heart of New York. When times were tough, kasha stretched a family's food budget farther than meat ever could. Then came kugel, a baked noodle or potato pudding, sweet or savory depending on what scraps were around. A Sabbath staple, kugel carried stories from every corner of Eastern Europe. Some baked it with cottage cheese and raisins, others with onions and black pepper. It filled bellies, warmed kitchens, and reminded families that faith could taste like comfort. In the tenements, women would bake both dishes in shared basement ovens, swapping trays and gossip while the aromas filled the air. Even now, one bite of kasha or kugel feels like time travel. Back to a world where thrift met tradition, and flavor was its own kind of prayer. 4. Knish. Walk down Hester Street in 1910 and you'd hear it, the cry of the niche man pushing his cart through clouds of steam. Hot knishes, 2 cents. These golden, hand-sized pastries were more than snacks. They were portable survival. Mashed potatoes, onions, or kasha, wrapped in thin dough, baked or fried till crisp. Cheap to make, filling to eat, and easy to carry. The perfect meal for the overworked tailor or pushcart vendor. In the old country, knishes were festival food. In New York, they became everyday fuel. Immigrant women rolled and sold them by the dozen, each one shaped by hand and baked in coal ovens that filled the street with buttery scent. Some stuffed them with cabbage or meat scraps, others with mashed potatoes so smooth they melted in your mouth. By the 1920s, Knishes stalls dotted Coney Island and the Bronx, proof that something humble could rise higher than anyone dreamed. It wasn't just a pastry. It was a small, warm promise that even in the new world, you'd never go hungry again. 5. Pickled kosher Dill cucumbers. Walk through Orchard Street in the summer of 1912, and you'd catch it. That sharp, mouth-watering tang drifting from barrels lined along the sidewalks. These weren't ordinary cucumbers. They were kosher dills, cured in garlic, salt, and cold brine, never vinegar, by Jewish picklers who worked from dawn till dusk. For families with no refrigerators and little money, pickling was a way to stretch the harvest through the winter. Every barrel was a science experiment of patience and pride. Immigrant children earned pennies fetching pickles for neighbors, and customers argued over which barrel had the perfect snap. The pickle became more than a side dish. It was New York's crunch of resilience. The taste of something sour turned into joy. It stood proudly beside pastrami sandwiches, next to corned beef, beside every meal that told the same story. We took what was humble and made it last. And that's how a brined cucumber became one of the city's first street legends. 6. Gefilte fish. No dish confused Americans more, or meant more to Jewish families, than gefilte fish. In the shtetls of Eastern Europe, fish was expensive, so families learned to stretch it, grinding scraps of pike, carp, or whitefish with onions, eggs, and matzo meal, then shaping it into tender patties simmered in broth. When immigrants brought the recipe to New York, it became a Sabbath essential. You'd see mothers at the fish market, haggling for heads and bones, turning waste into tradition. The smell filled every tenement hallway on Friday afternoons. Sweet, savory, unmistakably Jewish. To outsiders, it looked strange, but to those who knew, gefilte fish wasn't just food. It was identity. Served chilled with a dab of horseradish, it reminded them of home, of rivers they left behind, of grandparents they'd never see again. It was proof that you could lose everything and still keep flavor, still keep faith alive on a single plate. 7. Matzo ball soup. When a pot of matzo ball soup simmered in a New York tenement kitchen, it meant one thing. Someone cared enough to make comfort out of almost nothing. Born from necessity and faith, this dish turned matzah, the unleavened bread of Passover, into something warm, soft, and healing. Immigrant mothers crushed leftover matzah, mixed it with eggs and schmaltz, rolled it into balls, and dropped them into bubbling chicken broth that filled the air with hope. For many Jewish families, chicken itself was a luxury, so bones, skin, and necks were simmered for hours to coax out every ounce of flavor. The broth carried the scent of home, garlic, dill, and a hint of memory. Children came running when the spoon hit the pot. Matzo ball soup wasn't just food, it was medicine for the soul. Served on Sabbath evenings or to cure colds, it reminded everyone that love, patience, and a bit of cleverness could turn scraps into something sacred. Even today, one spoonful feels like a hug from history, proof that even the poorest kitchens in old New York could still serve grace in a bowl. 8. Pastrami on rye bread. If New York had a flavor, it would be pastrami on rye. The sandwich began in the smoky backrooms of Jewish delis run by Romanian immigrants who brought with them an old trick, preserving beef through brining, smoking, and seasoning. What started as a necessity became an art form. They took cheap cuts of brisket, rubbed them with garlic, coriander, and pepper, then smoked them slow, over wood, until the meat turned crimson and tender. Layered high on slices of fresh rye bread, smeared with mustard, and served warm, it was more than lunch. It was liberation from blandness. In the Lower East Side, delis became sacred gathering spots. Workers from nearby factories lined up shoulder to shoulder, swapping stories between bites. Each sandwich told the story of making do, of transforming struggle into flavor. By the 1920s, pastrami on rye wasn't just a Jewish meal, it was New York itself on a plate. The chew of the bread, the spice of the meat, the tang of the mustard, all proof that hardship could be smoked, sliced, and served with pride. 9. Corned beef brisket. Before corned beef became a deli classic, it was an immigrant's miracle. Jewish butchers in early 1900s, New York learned to transform one of the toughest, cheapest cuts of meat, brisket, into something tender and deeply flavorful. They cured it in salt brine for days, boiled it with onions, garlic, and peppercorns, then sliced it thin to serve on rye or beside boiled potatoes. It was a masterclass in patience. For families who couldn't afford prime cuts, corning was survival, preserving meat without wasting a single bite. On Fridays, the smell drifted through the tenements, a mix of spice, salt, and comfort that told neighbors the Sabbath was near. At first, corned beef was eaten plain, sometimes shared by 3 or 4 people from one slab, but over time, it became a centerpiece, proudly served at weddings, holidays, and deli counters that would one day feed all of New York. This dish proved something powerful. With a little time and faith, even the toughest meat, like the toughest life, could be made tender. 10. Cholent. In the tenements of old New York, Cholent was the heartbeat of the Sabbath, a stew that cooked while families prayed and rested. It was born from the rules of faith, no cooking on the Sabbath. So on Friday afternoon, Jewish mothers layered beans, barley, onions, potatoes, and a few precious scraps of meat into heavy pots. They'd carry them to the neighborhood bakery where the ovens stayed warm all night. By Saturday afternoon, the air of the Lower East Side was thick with its aroma, rich, smoky, slow-simmered comfort. Families would pick up their pots after synagogue, the lids hot to the touch, and gather around crowded tables to share a single perfect meal. Cholent wasn't fancy. It was patient. It taught generations that good things take time, that faith and flavor could coexist in one humble pot. For immigrants who worked long, punishing weeks, that warm stew was rest itself. A reminder that even in struggle, there was always something worth waiting for. And in every spoonful, you could taste it. The Sabbath, the old country, and the quiet peace of survival. 11. Rugulach. When Jewish grandmothers baked Rugulach in old New York, the whole tenement smelled like sweetness and survival. These crescent-shaped pastries came from Eastern Europe, where butter was scarce and every crumb counted. In New York, with access to flour, sugar, and jam, the recipe blossomed into something new. Flaky dough rolled around fillings of walnuts, raisins, cinnamon, or fruit preserves. Rugulach was often baked late at night after the day's work was done. Immigrant mothers kneaded dough on narrow kitchen tables, while children did homework beside them. The heat from the oven doubled as warmth against the city's winter chill. Each roll was a small act of love, baked not for profit, but for memory. When the first bite flaked and melted on your tongue, you didn't just taste sugar. You tasted endurance. You tasted joy that refused to die in hard times. Rugulach was proof that sweetness could survive even the roughest journey, that no matter how far from home you were, the old world could still live in your hands. 12. Babka. In the crowded tenements of the Lower East Side, Babka was luxury disguised as thrift. It began as a way to use up leftover dough from Sabbath Challah, rolled thin, spread with jam, sugar, or cinnamon, then twisted and baked into a loaf that looked like art and smelled like heaven. When chocolate became affordable in New York, Jewish bakers transformed it again, swirling cocoa and sugar into the dough until each slice told a story in dark, sweet lanes. Mothers baked babka for holidays, weddings, or whenever they needed to lift the mood of a weary week. Its golden crust crackled as it cooled on windowsills above the clamor of Hester Street. Neighbors traded slices like good news. Babka wasn't about indulgence. It was about celebration in small doses. A sweet reminder that life, no matter how hard, still had layers of joy hidden inside. And in every twist of that bread was a silent promise. Better days are coming. Just let it rise. 13. Brisket in onion mushroom gravy. Before it became a staple of every Jewish holiday table, brisket was simply the cheapest cut the butcher had. Tough, stringy, and slow to soften. But Jewish immigrants in old New York knew how to turn hardship into tenderness. They browned the meat in schmaltz, covered it with sliced onions, garlic, and mushrooms, and let it braise for hours in a low oven until the whole apartment smelled like warmth itself. Brisket wasn't rushed. It was earned. Families planned for it days in advance, saving drippings and broth to build that deep, savory gravy. On Friday nights, when the work week ended, the brisket came to the table glistening, a symbol of patience rewarded. Served with potatoes or noodles, it fed everyone, sometimes for days. The onions turned silky, the sauce rich and brown, and the meat tender enough to cut with a fork. In that one pan lay the story of Jewish New York. Humble ingredients, slow labor, and a flavor that refused to give up. 14. Herring in sour cream. For Jewish immigrants in early 1900s, New York, herring was the taste of both survival and home. In the old world, it had been the fish of the poor, salted, pickled, and preserved to last through brutal winters. When families arrived in America, they found barrels of it waiting on Delancey Street, sold cheap to anyone with a few pennies to spare. To soften its salt, they soaked the fillets overnight, then folded them into cool sour cream with onions, a splash of vinegar, and maybe a pinch of sugar. Served with black bread or boiled potatoes, it was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on what the day allowed. The flavor was bold, sharp, creamy, and unforgettable. For newcomers in a strange land, it was a bite of memory. Eating herring in sour cream wasn't about luxury, it was about keeping one's roots alive when everything else had changed. Even now, one taste can carry you back to those narrow tenement kitchens, to laughter, to struggle, to a world where salt, cream, and faith were enough to feed the soul. 15. Egg cream. Despite its name, there's no egg and no cream in a true New York egg cream. It was the magic trick of the Jewish soda fountains, born in the early 1900s when kids wanted a taste of luxury they couldn't afford. A few cents bought a tall glass filled with seltzer, a splash of milk, and a ribbon of chocolate syrup, whipped together into a fizzy, frothy miracle. For immigrant children growing up in cramped tenements, this drink felt like pure joy in liquid form. They'd watch in awe as the soda jerk worked his rhythm. Pour, stir, fizz, foam, until the glass sparkled like celebration. On hot summer days, whole lines of factory workers and street kids crowded into corner shops just for that first cold sip. It was simple, cheap, and oddly beautiful. Sweet chocolate, light bubbles, creamy foam on top. In a world where so much was hard, the egg cream reminded you that happiness didn't need money, just imagination and a nickel. And that's why, even today, it's more than a drink. It's New York nostalgia in a glass. 16. Whitefish salad on rye. In the delis of early 1900s New York, whitefish salad was elegance on a budget. It began in the smokehouses along the East River, where Jewish immigrants salted and smoked local lake whitefish. Cheaper than salmon, but just as rich. They flaked the tender meat, mixed it with a bit of mayonnaise, lemon, and onion, and spread it thick on rye bread. It wasn't fancy, but it felt fancy. The creamy smokiness, the chew of rye, the sharp bite of onion. It was Sunday comfort for families who worked 6 days a week. You could find it at every pushcart, every deli counter, every Sabbath spread where guests might stop by. To a generation that had known hunger, whitefish salad was proof of success. A meal you didn't have to stretch or share. It was creamy, salty, satisfying, and unmistakably New York. One bite and you'd know. This wasn't just food. It was pride between two slices of bread, the flavor of having finally made it in America, one smoky spoonful at a time. 17. Potato latkes with applesauce. Few smells could stop a family in their tracks, like potato latkes frying in a pan. Grated potatoes, onions, and eggs, fried crisp in shimmering oil, filled the tenements of old New York with the scent of home. During Hanukkah, mothers stood over the stove for hours, flipping each pancake to golden perfection, while children waited, faces glowing in the light of the flame. Latkes weren't just holiday food, they were history retold. They symbolized the miracle of oil that burned 8 nights instead of 1, a story of survival perfectly mirrored in the immigrant struggle. Paired with applesauce or sour cream, they carried both sweetness and comfort, a mix of hardship and hope. In those narrow kitchens, oil was precious, and potatoes were cheap, the perfect combination for families stretching every dollar. Yet, when a platter of hot latkes hit the table, it felt like a feast fit for kings. Crispy edges, soft centers, and that first steamy bite. Each one a golden promise that even in the hardest times, you could still taste joy. 18. Onion rolls. Before the bagel sandwich ruled New York delis, there was the onion roll. Soft, fragrant, and covered in golden bits of fried onion that clung to your fingers. It was the unsung hero of the Jewish bakery, born from leftover dough, brushed with egg, and sprinkled with whatever onions the bakers had left at day's end. Fresh from the oven, these rolls were irresistible, tender inside, crackly on top, and bursting with the scent of caramelized onion. Immigrants grabbed them on their way to work, often tearing off pieces to share with a friend or dipping them into soup at lunchtime. But the onion roll's secret power was versatility. It held pastrami, brisket, chopped liver, or just a smear of butter when times were lean. Its flavor turned even the simplest meal into something that felt rich. In the bakeries of the Lower East Side, trays of onion rolls cooled by open windows, their aroma drifting into the streets like an open invitation. reminding everyone that comfort didn't have to be fancy, just fresh, warm, and shared. Some bakers guarded their onion roll recipes like family secrets, passing them quietly from father to son, mother to daughter. And even decades later, one whiff of that sweet, toasty onion scent could carry an old New Yorker straight back to those bustling streets and simpler days. 19. Challah Brea. Among the smells that drifted through New York's tenement halls, none felt holier than challah baking before the Sabbath. This golden, braided loaf was the centerpiece of every Jewish table, a sweet, egg-rich bread that shimmered with a gloss of hope. Immigrant women rose before dawn on Fridays, mixing flour, sugar, and eggs by hand in chipped bowls, letting the dough rise as the city outside thundered awake. Challah was more than bread. It was a ritual, each braid symbolizing family, unity, and faith woven together through hardship. Even when money was tight, families saved enough for flour and a single egg, knowing the Sabbath wouldn't feel complete without it. As the loaves baked, the scent filled the air like music, softening even the hardest weeks. Children would tear off warm pieces before the meal, dipping them into honey as laughter filled the cramped apartment. To break challah was to remember life might be tough, but blessings, like bread, are meant to be shared. Some families sprinkled sesame or poppy seeds on top, a small touch of beauty that made each loaf feel like celebration. And when the first slice was shared, it wasn't just food passing hands. It was love, gratitude, and the quiet faith that tomorrow would rise, just like the dough. 20. Blintzes with cheese or fruit filling. Long before diners served pancakes or crepes, Jewish immigrants in old New York were already rolling out blintzes, paper-thin pancakes wrapped around soft cheese or sweet fruit. They came from the kitchens of Eastern Europe, where mothers used every drop of milk and every scrap of flour to feed large families. In New York, that tradition continued, but now the fillings were richer, the fruit riper, the possibilities endless. Blintzes were cooked on cast-iron skillets blackened by years of use, then browned in butter until their edges turned crisp and golden. Sweet cheese, apple, or cherry fillings peeked out with every bite. They were a taste of home wrapped in tenderness. Comfort you could hold in your hand. On holidays or special Sundays, immigrant families would crowd around the stove, waiting their turn for a fresh, steaming roll. Served with a dusting of sugar or a dollop of sour cream, Blintzes reminded everyone that joy didn't have to be extravagant. It could be thin, rolled, and shared hot off the pan. Blintzes were so beloved that families often made them in batches, stacking them high and saving a few for the next morning, if they lasted that long. The scent of butter and sweet cheese lingered through the hallways, drawing neighbors to knock just to say hello, hoping for one more taste of home. 21. Matzo. During Passover, when bread vanished from Jewish homes, Matzo stepped in like an old friend. It was the ultimate make-do breakfast, broken pieces of matzah soaked in water or milk, then scrambled with eggs in a sizzling pan. Immigrants called it Jewish French toast, though it was simpler, humbler, and far more symbolic. In the crowded kitchens of the Lower East Side, mothers made it sweet or savory depending on what they had, a drizzle of honey or sugar when times were kind, a sprinkle of salt and onions when they weren't. Kids loved the crackle as it hit the pan. Fathers loved that it filled bellies for pennies. Matzo carried a lesson that every immigrant knew by heart. Even during restriction, there could be comfort. Even when food laws limited choice, creativity could feed the soul. Served hot from the skillet, it tasted like resilience, crisp edges, soft center, and faith folded right in. Some families turned it into a competition. Who could flip the biggest, fluffiest piece without breaking it? Others swore their secret was letting the matzah soak just long enough, turning a simple dish into a ritual of patience, pride, and family tradition passed down through generations. 22. Tzimis. If there was one dish that could make a kitchen smell like celebration, it was tzimis, a slow-cooked stew of carrots, dried fruit, and honey that turned simplicity into sweetness. In the early 1900s, Jewish immigrants made tzimis for holidays, weddings, and Sabbath dinners, filling their tiny apartments with the fragrance of sugar and spice. It began as peasant food in Eastern Europe, where carrots symbolized gold, a wish for prosperity in hard times. In New York, families added what they could afford: prunes, raisins, sweet potatoes, maybe a touch of cinnamon if luck allowed. the pot simmered for hours, each ingredient softening into the next until it became more memory than meal. Zimis wasn't just about taste, it was about optimism. Every bite said, better days are coming. It reminded families that sweetness could survive the bitter. For children of the tenements, Zimis was dessert and dream in one spoonful, proof that even in struggle joy could still bubble quietly on the stove. 23. Sabich-style egg and eggplant pita variant. Before Sabich became a famous Israeli street food, Jewish immigrants in early 1900s New York were already making their own version. A hearty egg and eggplant sandwich inspired by old Sephardic and Mizrahi traditions. Many Jewish families who came from Iraq, Yemen, and the Levant carried these flavors with them. Roasted eggplant, boiled eggs, pickled vegetables, and a drizzle of oil tucked inside warm pita or challah rolls. In the tenement kitchens of the Lower East Side, ingredients were swapped for whatever was available. Sometimes it was fried eggplant layered with potatoes and eggs. Sometimes just bread rubbed with garlic and olive oil. It was quick, filling, and portable, the working man's Sabbath breakfast, eaten on the way to the factory or synagogue. Even without tahini or fancy spices, this early New York Sabich had soul. It was smoky, creamy, and grounding, a reminder that Jewish food wasn't one story, but many, braided together like challah itself. Each bite carried the journey of people who refused to forget where they came from, even while learning to taste the new world. 24. Wheat-based mock roasts from kosher delis. In the early 1900s, Jewish delis across New York faced a challenge: how to serve hearty meat dishes that stayed strictly kosher and affordable. The answer: mock roasts made from wheat gluten, what we'd call seitan today. Long before vegetarianism was trendy, these deli owners were pioneers of plant-based innovation. They'd mix vital wheat gluten with broth, onion, and spices, shape it like a roast, then braise it for hours in savory gravy until it sliced like brisket. To the eye, and even to the nose, it looked like meat. To the struggling immigrant, it was genius, a Sunday feast without breaking religious rules or the family budget. Mock roasts were often the centerpiece at Sabbath meals when real beef was out of reach. Families gathered around the table, cutting generous slices, the gravy thick and aromatic. For a people who knew hunger too well, this clever creation wasn't imitation. It was adaptation. These early kosher delis didn't just keep faith alive. They helped invent the future of food, proving that with enough love and creativity, even wheat could taste like home. 25. Plum-filled yeast dough pastries. As the week drew to a close in Old New York, Jewish families often celebrated with a touch of sweetness, and few treats felt more comforting than plum-filled yeast pastries. They came from the bakeries of Poland and Galicia, where ripe plums were wrapped in pillowy dough, left to rise slowly, and baked until the fruit burst through the seams in sticky, purple streaks. In the tenements, mothers recreated them with whatever fruit they could find from the pushcarts, sometimes prune jam, sometimes fresh plums from the market stalls on Orchard Street. The scent of sugar, butter, and yeast filled the hallways, drawing children from every floor. These pastries were more than dessert. They were a reminder that sweetness was still possible, even in lean times. Eaten warm, dusted with sugar, they symbolized gratitude, a small, shining reward after a week of hard work and long prayers. For many immigrant families, those soft rolls were proof that joy didn't have to be bought. It could be baked, shared, and remembered. And in that last bite of plum and dough, the story of Jewish New York lingered. Humble, homemade, and full of heart. When you piece it all together, the bagels, the brisket, the kugel, the pickles bubbling in barrels, you realize something beautiful. Jewish immigrants didn't just bring food to New York. They brought a way of surviving through flavor. Every dish told a story of making do, of turning scarcity into warmth and hardship into heritage. In the early 1900s, kitchens were small, wallets were thinner, and dreams were fragile. But the meals, they were rich with spirit. From a 2-cent Knish eaten on a factory break to a Sabbath stew that simmered while families prayed, every bite carried history. These foods didn't just feed people. They built community, comfort, and identity in a city that never stopped moving. And here's the truth. Many of those same flavors still fill New York today. Walk through any deli, bakery, or street fair, and you'll taste echoes of that immigrant courage. The courage to keep flavor alive, no matter how hard life got. Because in the end, these weren't just recipes. They were love letters written in dough, smoke, and spice. The taste of survival that built a city.